Okay, so I think I'm kind of zeroing in on a potential conclusion here. The subtraction always kind of works the positioning cam consistently as far as it starts it and ends it, but the exit from the subtraction is always very harsh with a lot of force. Addition will initiate the this positioning cam, but it won't cancel it. And the toggle that cancels or closes the toggle for the positioning cam is this arm right here. And there's a slot and another lever back on the other side that, according to the documents, it should be nearly bottoming out. And this thing, looking at the drawings, this hook should be much more intimately in contact with a pin that, unfortunately, you just can't see from here. And I've been trying to get the camera to position better, and so on the other end of this toggling hook, there's this kind of a locator arm here that goes to this kind of a cross-shaped device, of which its function is a little vague yet still. It looks like it's kind of got a spring back here, and it looks like it might have some linear motion and or subtle rocking motion. It plainly, it can trip this, or this trips something else, and this trips something else. It looks like it does 2 or 3 or 4 different things, but that toggle braking arm for the locating cam is supposed to, according to that document, is supposed to just about bottom out, but not bottom out. It's a bit vague as whether or not it's supposed to be there before it makes the brake or after the brake. That's kind of the question mark. But it looks like, anyway, to look at it, that there's a hook that should be much more intimately close to a pin in there that'll be pushed by it when it rotates and forces the this whole kind of a cam yoke mechanism to pop up over the cam and break that. And it's way too far down, and this guy's way too far back in this gap where I think it's supposed to be. And so there's a kind of a broad flat surface of the arm that just makes contact with this pin from this hook arm, and it manages to break it very roughly with the subtraction, and it never does with the addition. And that loop should be much more into or around the pin, and it's not. And so I suspect what's happened is somebody, kids or people who don't know anything about this stuff, or maybe I myself, bullied this thing. I don't think I've been pretty careful about not bullying stuff. But somebody twisted it too hard, and it twisted on the shaft, and it's no longer remotely in position. So it almost kind of works with subtraction, although harshly, and it doesn't work with addition. It doesn't just, addition never cancels it, and the subtraction does, but my gosh, you have to put a lot of force in it, and hopefully that hasn't been too much. It's plainly too jarring in the mechanism. So I have tried to not adjust anything on this thing so far, on the assumption that everything's good and it just needed lubrication and cleaning. But I'm beginning to think that if I want to get around this problem, I have to take and actually make my first actual real adjustment, which is loosening a screw and adjusting a clamp collar that goes on a shaft that adjusts this arm, and get it into that shaft. And I'll show the drawing here next. Here's the drawing for the cam system, neutralizing system, and my thought is this arm here is too far down out of place. Looking at it, it should be, right now they're depicting it like the cam is, I think, almost open. I guess what they're actually probably showing here is a fairly new, it's probably about halfway, and it's close to tripping the latch back closed. This pin, when there's a crank out here, this arm will move, this will move this arm down this shaft, it'll rotate this guy, and this pin will hook and pop this guy forward. Then these two pins, which are spring-loaded, pop back in, and these rollers hit this cam. And right now, this hook, instead of sitting pretty close to intimately in contact with it, in this kind of I think it's a halfway state, is what they're showing here, it's way down here. And there's kind of a flat spot, it's right here, And that flat spot's actually what's hitting this pin. So it's kind of sitting here going clunk, and it's not rotating neatly in there and pulling it in. It's kind of pushing on this and jamming really hard. And this guy should be further inside this slot. They say not to bottom it out, and I think they mean to not bottom it out in its extreme, I think, upward stroke probably, because this will, once this is fully up and these rollers are fully seated in this cam, this guy will rotate back and not quite bottom out with this guy. So I guess my gauge would be to make an adjustment with the cam levers fully closed up against the inside of the cam loops here. Make certain that this doesn't bottom out, and this makes a nice gentle contact, I guess. A loop, maybe a little bit of slap. But right now, when it does make contact, it only makes contact here, and it's normally, when this thing's normally in its I guess open latched open position. This guy's way down here, and it's nowhere near this pin, and this guy's almost outside this slot. So my guess is that sometime things seized up and jammed, people bullied it, and it slipped on this shaft, and that would explain why subtraction will close it, but oh so harshly. It'll hit this pin in a very bad angle and finally close this guy and end the cycle, at least for this cam mechanism part. Addition, just the differences between the two motions is just enough that it just can't do it. It doesn't close it. I guess it does close it randomly every once in a while. Maybe you turn the hand crank on the motor, stepper motor right now, really fast. It might have enough inertia. It just barely taps it and finally does close it. But it's not reliable, and it's not in the correct location. So this is kind of my first real adjustment I'm going to make to this machine. I've been trying to not change anything on this guy. And the assumption that it's just grease and oil is dried up and everything. And so far I've been pretty lucky. I've been able to just lubricate things and get things kind of moving without, because a lot of these things you're supposed to bend, like they're saying to make an adjustment you bend this little tab here, or they mention this guy has to be in the center of this slot here. Well, if you need to change something here, you can bend this arm, or there's a screw here you can apparently adjust in some way. So I'm trying to not tweak physical geometries so much at the moment. I really don't want to, because I think most of it's probably good. It's just grease, oil issues, drying out, and so forth. But this guy's plainly wrong, so I'm going to have to give this guy a try, and maybe with that I can finally get addition and subtraction to behave a little nicer. So wish me luck. So here's a close-up of the, I guess it's called the neutralizing cam, and its function seems to be, I think, largely to synchronize the mechanism back once other activities are done that doesn't require its services, which is, I think, mostly just, as far as I can gauge, it looks like it's meant to act as a homing position for the split gears here. And these split gears have to, of course, be precisely lined up, otherwise when you hit a button you might wind up with a different result than what you were expecting, because they weren't actually sitting where they were supposed to be. And so I think that's its largest function. The question is when it is approaching being the toggle's about ready to be broken by that arm. In the case of subtraction, I think it's kind of sitting over on one side, and addition, it's sitting on the other side. It's never truly like in a neutral point, and then these guys can just pop in. And I think it's part of the compromise of which direction you're coming from and how much you can get away with. And so these cams are sitting out here somewheres, and this guy is about ready to hit that, and then the thing pops back into that valley, and then you basically find a known home location, as it were, for the split gears. The cam, the toggling arm, when it closes it looks like it has to go to minimum speed, is what I'm starting to conclude. The original idea was that I needed I could only go to a maximum speed. It was for some reason, but it looks like it's might be more of a minimum speed, and so far this might be the only device I've found so far that requires a minimum speed. So, you know, if I have it set to the where it works pretty smoothly as long as I maintain a minimum speed. But you'll notice that there's a little bit of bounce there, and the question is that bounce unavoidable? The cam, when it pops in, does generate a little bit of a bouncy jar. These guys will oscillate for just a tiny little moment before everything kind of settles. And it'd be interesting to know, folks that have these machines, whether or not this is normal or not. But as long as I crank it a lot more vigorously or speedy-wise than I had been, and my eyeball guesstimate is it's about 240 RPM at the planetary, then the hook mechanism on the that engages that pin actually works about right. It doesn't hang up and snag and so forth, and it seems to be releasing this toggle pretty nicely now. But there is a bit of a bounce at the end that seems to be, I would think, unavoidable, and I think it's part of their partially breaking this toggle that they're talking about, and it's probably the shape of the hook. And it could be that if I go below a certain speed, the rate of acceleration when that toggle is broken that the spring is pulling this in versus how fast that toggle is moving, they don't synchronize too well, and that pin then kind of snags on instead of moving, you know, the initial toggle partial break is about there, and then as everything moves, it kind of seats more in that hook, and it kind of partially maybe holds on to the that pin and keeps these guys from pounding in quite so fast. And then as everything's kind of moving along, this arm's moving along, and then it finally reaches a geometry where the springs really take over, and then the whole thing really does close. And the question is do I have that set well or not, or whether or not I don't have it set well. I don't think it would harm anything this way, and it seems to work pretty well. I didn't quite get that button. There we go. And it works pretty nice right now. It looks like it was heading. Let's see if I do subtraction. So subtraction is going from this view clockwise, and so during the last little bit of travel clockwise, I'm not sure if I'm overshooting slightly or undershooting. It's popping back this way or popping back that way before it kind of sets in there. And then addition, it's going the opposite direction. It'd be nice if I had a high-speed camera to be able to record this. I don't know if I can do slow motion. So I guess the question is that a good setting or not? So far, you know, it's working so much better for addition and subtraction. Before in subtraction, you know, it was just like crunch and it would pop. But now with that arm set the way it is, so long as I crank a minimum speed, it's pretty nice. But it kind of ruins a little bit of my hoping to use the stepper motor at very slow demonstration speeds. But I could maybe do a little bit of a software tweak where as you get closer to the point where this mechanism has to do its breaking of this toggle, it'll goose the motor up to the little bit higher speed minimum that's needed to goose it and then back down, or something like that. Or maybe I can modify the toggle to work without their little feature. I'm not even sure if their little partial hook unhook thing really even works. Maybe they're being optimistic on that. It seems to me that if you're going to spring load this thing and it's going to pop into this cam, the cam is, you know, somewhere's over here when you want to align everything up, and it's somewhere's over here when you want to line things up when it's going one direction or the other, and you have to average that out to something in between. Is the reason they're kind of doing this, I think. That you're dealing with springs and you're going to have a certain amount of bouncing around, and I don't see really anything getting around it. And just looking at the cam or the split gears, they look like they'd probably be fine. There's a little, you know, tiny little how many microseconds bouncing around, and I don't see that could really be an issue. Maybe it's a little harsher on the mechanism over time. The problem is I don't know if that's normal or not. I haven't had this machine to be able to say that. So if anyone has a running machine and can actually see these guys when it goes through its motions, and can see if these little split gears are doing too much of a bounce compared to, see, yours, and you think yours is running ideally. It'd be nice to know if I need to do any further adjustments. But otherwise, addition and subtraction is addition finally gets that neutralizing cam to the toggle to break and pop back in and get the cam to sit in there correctly. And addition ends its cycle so much better than it used to. It was every single time it was cringe, am I wrecking things when I would turn on it. And the question is, if indeed it's a minimum speed requirement, maybe there never was a problem to begin with and I just wasn't turning it fast enough. I guess that's a possibility, but I can turn it at a low speed and that's kind of back to its very old behavior there. It could very well be that, well, their additions did cancel though. So that's one thing I could not get it to. I could not get addition to cancel. It might be that if there was some tweaking to be done, I could maybe tweak it so maybe it could go a lower speed. It's a little more force than I would like, but it is less for subtraction than it used to be. But it does require a little bit more of you have to, maybe it's not so bad. It's one of those things where you just don't know what's normal if you've done one of these things for the first time. But if anyone has any opinion on, that's what's nice about YouTube and the internet. I'm not totally like isolated on a desert island on this sort of stuff, and maybe I can get some feedback on this, which is kind of what I'm hoping for with this whole thing. And I'm hoping maybe in the future, once I get this thing going, other people happen to cross the machine and they want to get the thing going, they can look at my struggles and maybe get some insight from it. So I'm hoping that my efforts are productive for me now and for future folks, and these things are preserved.